Welcome to Saltgrass, Turning the Goldfields Green, a show about how local communities can engage with the climate crisis at a grassroots level. In the last episode, we heard from some of the Djab Wurrung Heritage Protection Embassy protesters who have been occupying and protecting several trees of cultural significance along the Western Highway, an area that has been hotly contested for the last 3 years. It's a 12-kilometre stretch of land that cuts through Djab Wurrung women's country, with many hundreds of trees slated for clearing to allow for the highway upgrade. But among them are several very old trees that are of cultural significance to the Aboriginal people, the Djab Wurrung. As noted last time, and it is worth restating, this is controversial. Some members of the Djab Wurrung have approved the works and have been working with the state government to negotiate the path of the highway. But there are others who disagree and have put everything else in their lives aside to defend the trees. In this episode, I have 2 interviews for you. One with Gabe, the young man who was up the tree when the last show was recorded. He spent 2 nights and 3 days up in what is called the grandfather tree to successfully halt works until legal processes mandated a stop work, a reprise, until the 19th of November, which is this week. The other interview is with a woman who goes by the name of Spring Blossom. Both are Castlemaine residents and both have been visiting and living at the Djab Wurrung Heritage Protection Embassy camp on and off over the last few years. We discuss what the action a couple of weeks ago was like for them and what it means to them to be an Indigenous ally in times like this. Though we are discussing action happening on Djab Wurrung land, both of these interviews were recorded back on Jarra country, home of the Djab Wurrung. I would like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, as the struggles of being a traditional custodian of these occupied lands has not gone away.
Salt.
Salt of the earth.
Salt.
Salt. Grassroots. Salt of the earth people. Grassroots change.
Saltgrass. Listen to all episodes of Turning the Goldfields Green on saltgrass.podbean.com. So our first interview is with Gabe Lillington. We met at a beautiful location by a creek just out of Castlemaine, where he'd been camping with a friend for the last few days. They were about to head back over to the Djab Wurrung camp later that day. I apologise for the occasional wind sound, and Gabe was wearing a puffer jacket that makes a rustling noise, every time he moves his arms. It was really nice to meet him. He's a very thoughtful and gentle young man, and I really hope that you enjoy hearing his perspective on things. We're out near Castlemaine where Gabe's been camping since he came down from the tree. I'm just catching up with him about what that experience was like. So we're going to have some bird sound in the background, and it's quite lovely out here. It's a nice sunny day. All right, so Gabe, how did you hear about the Djab Wurrung sacred trees and how did you get involved?
I've been trying to remember that recently. It was last year. It wasn't when the red alerts went out, but it was around that time I went up for the first time with a friend for a day or a night, and we camped at a compound. They'd just been putting in the compound where now all the trucks and work vehicles and workers live, and it's become this big fortified place, but it was just putting up fences at that point. And yeah, I remember staying up all night there and feeling a sense of the country and like how the country was reacting to us camping there and vice versa, and just being able to listen to things and have things pointed out to me by mob and by people who'd been there a long time. Like, yeah, it was really cool, and I hadn't experienced that even though I'd grown up on Djab Wurrung country and around here and come camping out places like this before.
So you kind of got a different sense of engagement with the country.
Yeah, it just came, it's really hard to describe. It's like just synchronicities, and felt like the land had our back. You know, we were fighting together to kind of be protecting it. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So you went for that one night, and then how did you engage further after that?
Yeah, well, I went and had to come back. I think I was doing a permaculture course in town at the time, and was like, yeah, next weekend I'll be back there. And as it often happens, you get lost and wrapped up in what I was doing in Castlemaine, and forgot about that connection and how that had started to kind of work on me. And so like I went back maybe 6 months later, summer this year, when they were trying to push into women's camp, and we had some lock-on devices ready then to, if they were going to try and, they were trying to push in and do a survey up from where the road would start near Boingor and come up through women's camp, through the grandfather tree, and then over the train tracks to the directions tree and up to top camp. So yeah, we had a caravan and some cars there. That was the first experience I had with like being arrestable and preparing to be arrested and locking onto that with an elbow lock. We just waited for 3 mornings, kind of wondering if they were going to come every morning. That kind of really woke me up to what it could be like out there, and the intensity of the days and just the length of the days when that kind of pressure was being put on camp. But it also made me really feel connected in another way to the people there and to just my ability to stand.
So was there any training or advice or discussions about how to do all that stuff and how to handle the police if they came through and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, always people there with lots of legals knowledge and people who'd been there for a long time, and people who'd had experience with that before. So it was very consensual and everyone was given as many facts and information as possible about what they were putting themselves into and what they'd be facing at the cop shop and further on in court. There were worries that people who got arrested for those sort of actions would get really hectic bail conditions, which we saw happen recently. It means that the main one is that was given out last week was that people can't be in the Grampians or I think Stall area, which is a very broad, huge part of West and Central Victoria, and they can't write about their experiences being locked on or arrested. They can't refer to any Vic Roads or Major Roads Project Victoria's employees or anything basically that happened Vic Pol. Like just really trying to keep people quiet, I guess. And a lot of those bail conditions are now being overturned. I didn't get any because I was up there long enough for the lawyer to work it out. They fought for it and won that recently, which is amazing. Yeah.
That's great. So did you then go back and stay there over periods of time over the last few months before this last stint?
No, that was the last time. And in August I just felt like I needed to go back up there again. I'd come out of COVID pretty quickly and been on Djab Wurrung country here and had worked and done a bit of stuff and was thinking about moving back here and getting a share house, but I went out to Castlemaine, and then I went out there and pretty quickly just knew that cancelled those plans and just knew that I wanted to be out there full time, pretty much coming back here and visiting. Yeah, since late August, so September, October, it's just coming to November.
So what happened on the day that you decided to go up a tree and lock in?
Yeah, well, the day before had been massive, and we'd seen there like aggression and tactics from Vic Roads, Major Roads Projects, Vic Pol, public unit response cops. Like there were 50 or so cars of those, and we'd seen how aggressive they were going to be about moving from camp to camp, going first to directions tree and then going to women's camp, making people leave. At women's camp, right after they cut down the directions tree, they went and fenced the grandmother tree in there and all the buildings and set up a perimeter, basically set up security guards, set up lights, blocked off all the entrances. They dumped piles of dirt at some of the entrances so people couldn't get in, big rocks and stuff. So we knew they were going to try and hit top camp the next day. So yeah, I got a bit of sleep, and then everyone was just kind of working together to hold our ground and be as staunch as possible and work out who could be involved in what ways and who could fill the roles that needed to be filled. So that morning I was pretty busy most of the morning. I hadn't actually thought about what I was going to do myself. I was getting people ready to lock on the barrels, and my friend very wisely, like half an hour before the cops rocked up, had put a rope in the tree because he knew that would need more people there, and I had just checked in with me, and I said, yeah, I'm very happy to, like, thank you for thinking about me, really. And so I just quickly got up there, pretty much just as the cops pulled up, and got a friend to chuck some water and like some snacks in a bag. I just had the clothes that I was wearing, like a jacket and a t-shirt. Yeah, I didn't have much of a long-term plan just because things were so full that day.
So you ended up being up there for pretty much 3 days and 2 nights. What was the experience like? What was going through your head? And like, were there points where you're like, I just got to come down, or were you just staunch the whole time, like, I'm never coming down?
Yeah, there was definitely one point about 11:30 p.m. on the second night. It was getting cold again, proper cold, and like I had found a new spot to sleep, or trying to sleep, that I thought was going to be more comfortable, but it wasn't. And I just was really worried that I'd have to come down because I was not going to get enough sleep and just be fatigued, and it'd be too dangerous to be up there. And that made me feel really upset. At that point, I started getting kind of auditory hallucinations, and there's a circle of lights that were all running on really powerful generators around the trees, and they created this like hum, this quite loud thrum from all the different sides, created this very strange kind of situation. And I started hearing things like birds, but I heard thousands and thousands of birds, and all the trees were lit up with these super bright lights, so it felt like I was in this strange, like, amazing, like, enclosed arboretum or something.
Like you're an exhibit at the zoo or something.
Yeah, or involved in some strange future. Yeah, it was very weird. Light in the middle of the dark. So yeah, that was probably the only time I was like considering taking the cops up on their offer, or at least having more of a chat to them about it.
At that point, were you the only one left up a tree, or were there still some other people up there?
Yeah, my friend had left that morning, which, like, if he hadn't, I wouldn't have been able to stay up. The person who put the rope up was also in the tree for a few hours until that night, and they tried to get us some water, and they got arrested. So, like, without the whole community, but without those 2 people, I wouldn't have been able to stay up there, because the second person gave me the bag that they'd packed a bit more thoughtfully, and they gave me their jacket and their pants and food and water that they had. Didn't have much water, but they had a couple of crackers and some useful stuff. So yeah, that allowed me to stay up there.
And so that was night 2. Okay, you got up there on the Tuesday morning.
Yeah, Tuesday morning.
And so you're up there Tuesday night. What happened on Tuesday night? Because I heard the police destroyed some of the sort of support that you had on the tree. Is that right? Like a platform?
Yeah, that was in the arvo. They'd brought a cherry picker in. Cutting people out of the barrels had kept them busy, but they brought a cherry picker in later in the afternoon, and someone had set up a tree sit in the tree a long time ago, a few years ago, which was a great place to sleep and hang out, and had plenty of water and supplies. And so that was the first target that the forest search and rescue cops went for, and they took that down, said that if we wanted any of it we could come and get it. They left a packet of like protein shake, and that was it.
So they took the platform but left you a protein shake.
Yeah, so all the time saying that they had a duty of care and they kind of wanted us to be safe and well looked after, but this was the dialogue the whole time. People would say that, the cops would say that, and then they wouldn't action it at all. So I didn't feel like there was any point engaging in that conversation after a while, because they weren't actually going to do anything about it. So yeah, they took that down, and we climbed higher up into the tree, just with the supplies that we had in our backpack.
So you mentioned people locked onto barrels. What was the overall setup at that point in terms of people protesting and all of that?
There were 6 people connected to barrels with cement on them, locked on with wrist bracelets connected to carabiners that locked on into the barrel on the inside, so to take away all the cement and concrete to get to their hands and unlock them. Then there were people, legal observers who were filming, other observers who were filming, peacefully standing their ground. A group of protesters linked arms and sat down to make it more difficult for the cops to pull them off, and the cops were pulling them off with around their necks and kind of assaulting their heads to drag them away from the person they were linked arms with. And sometimes someone on the barrel just underneath the grandfather tree, they were ripped around, so their shoulder got dislocated that was already damaged, and they told the police that, and they did that. And then when they arrested them later on, they really pulled that shoulder up with the handcuffs. So that was really distressing to see, and not really able to do much, just yell kind of support and yell at the cops from up in the tree. And just seeing people slowly being pushed back and moved off, seeing Chels and other Djab Wurrung women being removed whilst singing and practicing their culture on their land was really hard to see. It was really messed up. Yeah. But they didn't try and get anyone down very hard with the cherry picker.
Yeah.
They just decided to wait us out.
Yeah.
I don't think they expected us to be up very long.
So you were up there long enough for a court case to be held and a decision to be made. It seemed to me that was absolutely fundamental. If you'd come down any time sooner, they would have just moved in and cut down the tree as soon as you were down.
I don't think they would have moved in and cut that grandfather tree down immediately. I don't know. It might be that unprotected. My understanding is it's not as protected as the grandmother tree, but they were telling me multiple times, and I got it on camera, that the police and major roads officials told me that tree wouldn't be cut down.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
So they've said that about things before. They've put out falsehoods about the directions tree being cut down. They've lied a lot. So I didn't feel comfortable coming down on their word. Yeah.
And so by the end of it, you must have been really sore and tired and hungry and thirsty. What's it been like since you've come down? What was your reception back at camp, and how's your recovery been, basically?
I actually felt really good. Usually when you're in a tree sit, you're just sitting and lying down all the time, unless you want to climb up basically vertically or down again. So your body is really high up, not being able to pump blood properly and not really being able to exercise your muscles or your limbs. This beautiful tree is so big and had so many different limbs and huge branches and different sections that basically I was just slowly exploring it over those couple of days and learning, gaining more confidence with my ropes and being able to kind of set up little beds in different spots and get to know it. And by the last day I felt really comfortable. I was really happy to be there. I kind of was confused and immediately a bit unsure about coming down, because unless it was for the right reason and Mob had wanted me to, which was the case, but it just started raining and I felt amazing in the rain. It felt really healing, and it was giving me the water that I needed, and felt super cleaned, and I didn't have much protection from it, but I didn't really feel like I needed it. So I felt really supple and energetic when I came down, and quite happy. Yeah, I just got fluids. That was the main thing. Yeah.
You mentioned that you had found a way to move in the tree. Over that period of time in the tree, your sense of the tree itself, did that change?
Yeah, definitely. I think sense that it was comfortable with me being there, and that he wanted to support me, and I began to feel more and more comfortable. On the second night, after us talking about feeling in a pretty whack space, I went down right to the bottom branch, which was huge, a huge width of my body and just lay there and actually got some sleep and some rest. And yeah, definitely felt very held the whole time there. I think it was a big part of my mental strength, and well-being.
You had your phone on you and a little wind-up charger, so you were able to stay in contact a little bit, but it was a struggle to actually communicate with the people on the ground, wasn't it?
Yeah, I dropped that wind-up charger on the second day and it broke. I couldn't access it, so I ran out of power pretty quickly after that. And I didn't feel very comfortable talking on non-encrypted services, which takes quite a lot of battery. So yeah, I basically just went out of contact pretty quickly, which was okay. I could see people across the road, and it was more like communicating to them. I've realized after the fact that like I wasn't in a terrible mental space.
So letting them know how you were was actually the thing you should have been doing. So now you're planning today to go back and spend more time. What are your thoughts about what might happen?
Just regrouping and just connecting to each other, I think, is a massive part of what's happening and what will continue to happen.
As a white person, as an ally, a lot of people talk about allyship and what it means to be an ally for Indigenous people or Black people. And what was your feeling about how to negotiate that in the camp, and some of the complexities of, for example, there is sort of a difference of opinion within the Djab Wurrung people. Like, it's only one portion of the Djab Wurrung people who are protesting the trees, and others have approved it. So what's your sense of how to navigate that sort of thing as a white person?
I think my gut, a lot of the time, listening to the people that are in front of me as well as listening to the other opinions, but I trust the mob that are there and that I've talked to and I've heard from, and the fight that they've been fighting, and I trust that they are connected to their land, and they're listening to their land and receiving information from there, and that's where to listen to. So I think being an ally or a protector is about trying to foster that connection with land yourself, respecting mother and respecting country, and respecting mob who have that connection and in a much, much deeper way and have had it for such a long time.
I know your dad's a permaculturalist and you've probably been raised with all sorts of green values, but how do you think that plays into also your desire to protect this particular landscape?
Yeah, I can't say, I guess, like logically necessarily, but I'm sure it does have an effect. I was talking to someone recently and they helped me kind of through the seeing like why I was doing this, and it kind of helped me with the kind of the thanks that I've been getting that I feel uncomfortable about, because so many people have been involved and are involved in protecting those trees. I guess just like feeling like this is my purpose at the moment, and I felt quite purposeless for the last few years, going to the city and coming back and, you know, not finding my core doing, and a lot of the things that I've kind of grown up doing, and yeah, the permaculture community that I've been around here and the values that I'm sure have been instilled in me, but also just like coming out here and camping I've been doing with my dad for a long time, and that sort of thing, just getting a love for that and getting a sense of love for like the important places around country, and being excited enough to like start setting myself up to do that on my own, and like kind of getting more and more comfortable camping around this area, like in the Anganuk and around the Loddon. And I mean, my mum was an activist as well. She was involved in the Green and Common protests, nuclear disarmament protests in England. So it's definitely very, very much supported by my family. They're very encouraging for me to just be houseless and going off in my car and it does feel like a pretty natural development for me at the moment, and I'm definitely keen to got a lot of will to keep doing it.
This living out of your car and living in a camp, and even now when you could be staying with your parents in a house, you're camping. Has it maybe shifted your idea of what is necessary to sustain life and our consumerist sort of object accumulating lifestyles?
Yeah, well, definitely being in the tree. I was just reflecting to my friend who I'm camping with about that this morning. Just the lack of things. Like even, there is a lack when you're camping and living out your car. Like every time I would go home to turn on the tap in the last few weeks when I was living at camp and see the water coming out, even that's a rainwater system, still being like, whoa, that's crazy to just have that ease in that system. Being up in the tree was another level of that, I felt, because I really had to conserve my water and food, and just that lack really allowed me to see the value and the beauty of the taste in like every time I allowed myself to have a bit of water, or like had a bit of like a protein shake nut feast once a day or twice a day, and like just a lot more in touch with where that energy was coming and into my body and out again, and how enjoyable that was to just really feel on the base level.
Did you feel like you got energy from the tree? It sounds like earlier that's what you were implying to.
Yeah, definitely. I think it gave me some of his energy to be there, just like a bird might, or bunya, the possums that live in that tree. I think any home that you have that's sustainable, it's not just about you building or creating spaces that fuel you, it's like that place is helping to fuel you as well.
That was Gabe Lillington talking about his time up the grandfather tree on Djab Wurrung land. Next, I have an interview with a woman who uses Spring Blossom as her activist name. She's a great-grandmother and has been an activist for much of her life. We have a chat about her involvement with the Djab Wurrung and how she, a great-grandmother, climbed into a grandmother tree to try and stop or slow the roadworks along the Western Highway. Early in this interview, I ask her what started her off as an activist, and she refers to her own experience with a child of hers being taken by the state against her will. This is forced adoption and was a practice that was common in the second half of the 20th century here in Australia. In 2012, there was an Australian Senate inquiry into this, and the resulting report found that babies were indeed taken illegally by doctors, nurses, social workers, religious figures, and sometimes with the assistance of adoption agencies or other authorities, and adopted to married couples. Some mothers were coerced or drugged, which made their consent, in inverted commas, a fiction. Many of these adoptions occurred after the mothers were sent away by their families due to the stigma associated at the time with being pregnant and unmarried. So I just wanted to give you that context for when she talks about it, because it was quite widespread and a lot of women experienced this. She also refers to Madeline or Maddie a few times, and she's referring to Madeline Hudson, who I interviewed about the zero waste cooking course at Community House in episode 8 of this series. I sat with Spring Blossom to record this interview in her garden in Castlemaine, which was so abundant with flowers and vegetables and greenery, as they use it as a very active food-producing garden, as you'll hear in the interview. It was beautiful. It was full of butterflies, and at one point a sulphur-crested cockatoo flew over us and started squawking at us from the branches of one of the trees. So you might hear that in this interview as well. So I'm sitting with Spring Blossom in her backyard, and it's been a week since all of the action at the Djab Wurrung Heritage Protection Embassy was happening, and I'm just going to have a chat about her experiences.
The first time that I went to the Djab Wurrung country at the top camp was with Auntie Sue and Charles Rankin, who had enlightened me to the fact that there was a struggle out there. So I went with Auntie Sue, and there were quite a few people, including Zelenak, camped there by then, and that's nearly 3 years ago. Yeah.
So how often have you been back there over those 3 years?
Oh, I've been there many times. I often stay overnight, and sometimes I just go down for the day, depending on whether I've brought someone with me that needs to get back or whether I've got the opportunity to stay the night. Sometimes I've stayed a few nights, and I've always contemplated the idea of moving there, but it never came to fruition. And I guess this is why, because we've come to the crossroads now of whether or not the Victorian government and the Victorian people can see the absolute significance of what it is that they're allowing to be destroyed, which is it's an international significance as much as anything, because it's a sacred ceremonial grounds where people have performed ceremonies for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it's so arrogant and disrespectful of the state government to allow this to occur.
Before we get to what happened last week and you climbing up a tree, tell me a bit about your history as an activist.
Well, I suppose the first time that I started feeling like an activist was the results of what the Victorian state government had done to me personally, which was that they removed my child from my body while I was unconscious, and they didn't give him back to me. And from that point on, I think that made me a person that was looking for justice and understanding of how do we get there. So after that experience, I travelled to Finland with a boyfriend that I'd married in Australia, and we travelled across the Trans-Siberian Railway to Finland, and I lived there for 6 months. And during that time I learnt a lot of things because I was reading a lot, and I was listening to Radio Moscow, and I was listening to Radio Luxembourg as well, which is, I don't know if some people would know, that's a very down-to-earth, radical, extreme sort of radio station that is very people-friendly and, informative. Then I came back to Australia and I got a job with Foreign Affairs and Trade in Canberra through the telecommunications. I worked for them for 7 years, and when I resigned, I knew I had to go back to the UK and follow my own ancestry. So in doing so, I was introduced by a retired forester to the yew trees. And the yew trees are a magnificent ancient tree that grows for thousands of years, and it's in the churchyards of most churches in England, Scotland and Ireland and Wales. And I ended up with 10 months in the UK following the trail of all the ancient yews across the continent of the UK, sitting in those trees and asking for my ancestry to be returned to me. I had visions and connections. Hello, Cocky.
Noisy one.
Yeah.
So then, when did you come back to Australia, and what other sort of campaigns have you been involved in terms of activism?
Well, when I had the job in Canberra with Foreign Affairs and Trade, I had the opportunity to do non-violent action training in regards to the Franklin River. And then I was offered a seat in a small plane to fly down to Tasmania, because the lecturer at the university couldn't make it because he had papers to sign. So I went in his place, and I was there the day that Bob Hawke got into power and the Franklin River was deemed free from being dammed.
That's a big moment.
It was amazing. It was an incredible experience, and I met some of my dearest friends down there, and who are still my friends today. And I'm very grateful for that connection to the people who have been working all their lives for the environment, basically. And, what it brings it back to is people are part of the environment.
What do you feel when you're down on Djab Wurrung amongst those trees?
Well, I think the whole area is a ceremonial ground, and the healing has taken place because of Zelenak and Amanda being there for so long. They've done ceremony and they've really tuned in, and the land is so happy that they've been there, recognising the place as a spiritual relation to the people who've lived there forever. So it's like, for me, I just feel like I always feel like I'm on Indigenous land. Don't feel that. I don't own land. I never would. It's not my ambition to own land. I think that the land can't belong to anybody. We're here for such a short time, and what we need to do is make peace with the land and allow it to have all the tiniest ecosystems surviving us and not destroying everything. So when I'm down there, I know I'm on the front line of a world movement, and that what we do and say is very important, and that we're not just speaking for ourselves, but we're speaking for the plants, plant medicines, the animals, the insects and the birds, and all of life, really.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about what happened last week and how you, I believe you're a great-grandmother, is that true? How you ended up the grandmother tree.
Well, I saw that the police were approaching and everybody was getting ready and people were locking on. And I walked beside Zelenak and I said, Zelenak, I want to go up into that grandmother tree. He said, all right, well, go on then. And I took that as having permission to go into the grandmother tree. So I then got a couple of the beautiful women that are supporters and protectors, and I said, can they help me? So they ran off and got a ladder, and they held the ladder while I walked up into the tree. But I didn't have time to get a bucket or water or a mask. I couldn't go to the toilet up there, so that was what shortened my stay in that beautiful grandmother tree. And she was so gentle with me. I just couldn't believe how soft and gentle she was with me. And at one point I took my attention off the protectors and the police and all that. And I started filming the bark on the tree, and as I did that I just burst into tears and started howling because it was so horrible to think that people would take away the life of something that's so old and so full of wisdom and knowledge that is possible to be passed on to people if they become sensitised to it. And so, yeah, that's how it was for me up there.
How long were you up there?
Only about, I don't know, maybe it was 3 hours or 4 hours or something like that. I don't know, because I was having breakfast when the police arrived, so it was about 8:30, so I guess I got there at 9 up in the tree, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe 3.5 hours. I couldn't tell how long I'd been up there. It was like I'd been there always.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, time was standing still, and I'm sure that that's the energy of sitting in a tree, and especially where I was, which was between the two main branches of the tree, way up high.
How did you get down?
Well, the three of the policewomen came because they actually were honouring the fact that it was Sacred Women's area, and so they started pulling the fence down, but the three women came up to me and said, what would you like to do? Do you want to come down? And I said, well, actually I have to come down because I've got to go to the toilet. So they said, oh, that's okay, we'll get you down, don't worry, we'll get the cherry picker. And Maddie had actually sent me a text saying, they're going to send the cherry picker over to get you down. So then the policewoman that was going to be with me in the cherry picker said, I'll just put this harness on you and we'll click this onto you. And I said, no, you're not going to do any of that. I said, I got up here on a ladder and I'm going to get down on a ladder, or I'm not going in that cherry picker. I said, and anyway, how much are you going to charge me for the cherry picker, for using the cherry picker to get me down? And she looked at me and questioned, and she didn't know, so they decided they'd get me a ladder for me, and they did. It was very simple to get down, and then they escorted me to the toilet, and then when I came out of the toilet they wanted to tell me that I had these rights and that I would either go or I could go. And I said, please stop, I just went to the toilet, I have to wash my hands, I need to go and wash my hands before I talk about this, okay? And they said, oh yeah, okay, so they escorted me over to where they could wash my hands. and they squirted Dettol all over my hands, and and I rinsed them, and then I went back to where they were with the paddy wagon there, and they said, "You can go if you like." And I said, "Oh, and what if I don't?" They said, "Well, we'll have to arrest you." I said, "Okay, well, I think you better arrest me." So they did, and they put me on in the paddy wagon, and I found out what it's like to be in a paddy wagon and in a cell that's not even got any padding, but it's all cement, and how horrible that must be for people who are re-traumatised when they're picked up by the police, and how traumatising that would be for them, and they'd go off their bloody heads, as I would if I was re-triggered in my post-traumatic stress disorder. And so this is what people don't recognise in Indigenous people, is that their families have been through so much pain and suffering because of all of the removal policies that happened way back, and the distortion of their families that happened because of the removal policies and the stolen generations, the deaths in custody, the removal of children. All of these things have affected more than just the one family. It's a ripple effect. It affects the whole community, and everybody is suffering because of these horrible things that have occurred. So, you know, to put them in a unpadded cell with cement everywhere and in a state of triggering their post-traumatic stress or whatever condition they might have had hidden would explode into a possibility of deaths in custody. It's just wrong, and the police are wrong, and I can't emphasise that enough.
As a white ally in situations like this, what do you feel your role or responsibility is, and how do you navigate perhaps the complexities of what the Djab Wurrung situation is, where there might be different Indigenous people on either side of the situation?
Look, I've been working with Indigenous issues for a long time. I've got a history of going back from when I arrived back in Australia after that trip away, and living in King's Cross and meeting some of the Aboriginal activists there, some of whom have passed, and they have been incredibly inspirational and the teachings have always been strong. So my relationship with the Indigenous struggle on this land is a personal one. I'm 6th and 7th generation Australian, and on both sides of my family, and I find that leaves with me an obligation to try and fix the relationships that we've had with our Indigenous people of this land, not but the people who have been here before European invasion. And so I feel a great responsibility to helping put this right. And in the way that I go about that is to listen to my elders, to follow their directives, and not to think that I can think my way out through it, but that their ancient thinking through their sustainable lifestyles in their communities is what our societies need to listen to and understand, and try to grasp the importance of how we can live in harmony with one another and not have these terrible lies and corruption and collusion with authority that doesn't earn their authority through life experiences, but being put in positions of power and being given the authority by a illegal government, we might say, because they came here in maritime law and they're still running on maritime law. It's a legal matter that needs to go to an international court for all Indigenous people to recognise that their land has been taken from them with a very abusive project set out by the people who've come to these lands and wanted to take over. And they did that with guns, because the people here never had any guns. It must have terrified them when the guns came shooting out and cannonballs that blew people up, and the massacres that occurred all over this continent. And, these things have been known to me for a long time. I think that the general public are now catching on to the fact that we've got a bloody history, a violent, abusive history that's been hidden from the people over decades and generations, and has only just been able to raise its head and say, hey, excuse me, we've got frontier wars here that we've never dealt with. We're dealing with all these other wars that happened across the other parts of the world, but we've never dealt with the war that has continued to operate here on Australian soil. So until we start to, as a nation, come of age and recognise that our history has been brutally inflicted and our colonial minds haven't been able to accept that we have this bloody history that we need to address in a proper way. And the proper way would be, if there's something stolen, it should be given back. And it doesn't mean giving all the land back, and nobody expects that, but it does mean that sacred sites all across this continent needs to be protected forever, and not just temporarily until the Lands Council gives permission to go in and log it or mine it or whatever, because that's not going to be of any value to the future generations and to the future history of our species. So I can see that as the people of Victoria awaken to the reality of what actually happened at Djab Wurrung, which was far more than the lives of a few trees, which I don't undermine at all, but the reality is that the whole area of 12 kilometres was sacred ceremonial ground where people practiced culture for thousands and thousands of years, and all of the plants and animals and trees still hold that culture and are able to transport it into the minds of the Djab Wurrung who haven't been exposed to it in their lifetime, but who can still, if they choose to, they can still return to that, as they can in any nation across this continent, which, you know, there's hundreds of nations across the continent, and people are returning to their own land.
How do you see this Indigenous struggle as linked to this sort of existential climate crisis and the way the West operates?
I think that, you know, the Franklin Dam was our win. It was wonderful. Along with Pine Gap, I was up there for the women's action in 1983 for Pine Gap. So these are all things that haven't really made much of a difference in the mindset of the authorities. And I think that in order for us to really contemplate the possibility of a future where we begin to repair the earth and work towards a sustainable lifestyle for everyone, firstly, we must acknowledge that there are people whose relationship to place has gone on for thousands and thousands of years, and that's not insignificant, and that we need to honour that, because people are part of the environment and they actually had relationships with all the species of animals and plants that are on that place. And it's that relationship that we need to heal, all of us, and we can be led into healing that through the recognition that Indigenous people hold the key as to how we can live in a certain place in a certain way, and the plants that need to be planted so that we can go back to a seasonal type of eating that's not to do with exporting foods all over the world in this way and that way and all the rest of it, but actually coming back to our garden. As you can see around us, we've got food growing everywhere. This is mine and Maddie's after 4 years producing food and making sure that we've got food. So I think that this is also the front line of the action, is to contain ourselves with our own food source, making sure that we can at least produce some of the food that we may need, and exchanging foods with others, so that we can also, you know, learn how to share predicaments, because it's going to get worse, and we need to understand that our relationships with one another are the most important aspects of how we go through the coming years that are going to be quite challenging. Going back to country and practicing culture is the healing aspect of how we start to encourage people to shift their consciousness out of a colonial mindset that has constructed a whole lot of stuff to do with the ways in which we see reality, and we actually need to cleanse our minds from the abuse that's inflicted from generations of assimilating into an illusion that there is more than enough for everybody to keep consuming. Because the bottom line is that materialism is tearing our planet apart, and we've got to stop. I don't know how we get people to understand that that's the key, is to stop consuming and start to produce our own foods and share what we have, and start recycling everything and finding inventive ways. You know, we've got so many bright people on the planet that have invented so many wonderful things for sustainable living. And we know that we've got the answers. It's just that we can't get our answers into the mainstream so that everybody benefits from the support that governments would give if everybody was on the same page. And that is that we work towards and move towards having a sustainable lifestyle. And, you know, you can talk about sustainable lifestyles in all sorts of ways. It won't matter if the climate changes so long as we look after ourselves. It's shifting in a paradigm shifting, so that we start moving into a different reality, because the consumer reality is killing us all. It's just driving us all into oblivion. And not only us, but all the plants and animals that will go with us too. And that's the sad part about it, is that these people who are doing all the mining and doing all the destruction on the planet, they just don't want to stop. And unless there's enough of us showing an alternative type of lifestyle to the mainstream, I don't think we'll get the mainstream to do anything about it, and that's the shame of it.
Does the highway through the Djab Wurrung trees sort of symbolise that for you?
This is sacred land. Leave it alone. It's women's land. The fact that it's women's birthing place, it just stirs my stomach. I feel sick thinking that these people think it's okay to do what they're doing. And also, I think that older women are our best shot at this. Older women with a big mouth and a lot of anger about the situation need to get out on the front line and start saying, no, you are not going to keep destroying our planet, our children's futures, and we're not going to allow you to do this. And we're going to stop you. But we've got to be in numbers. So come on, girls, everybody, hang your aprons up, forget about the cooking and looking after the family, get ourselves out there and start saying to this state government, you're wrong. You cannot do this. This is sacred place of women's birthing. Now, it needs to be a run-on to the fact that women are being abused left, right and centre. Domestic violence at its highest rate ever. And we've got to start thinking about the future in a way that we've never thought of it before, which is that women need to take charge and stop all this bull, particularly women who have had babies and who are mothers and who understand how to look after more than one person at a time. Because everybody's been looking after themselves, and we've got to start looking after everyone, not just one person.
That was Spring Blossom, a great-grandmother who climbed the grandmother tree in protest of the contested section of the Western Highway near Ararat in Victoria. You can keep up to date with what is happening at the Embassy via their Facebook page or website, both of which have links in the episode description at saltgrasspodcast.com. My name is Alison Hanley. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and please subscribe to our email list to get reminders and updates about the show. This program was made possible with support from the Community Broadcasting Foundation. Find out more at cbf.org.au. This program was produced in partnership with the Mount Alexander Sustainability Group, MASG, and Main FM. If you would like to respond to something discussed on the program, we'd love to hear from you. Please email us at saltgrasspodcast@gmail.com.
Salt. Salt of the earth. Salt. 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 Grassroots. Salt of the earth people. Grassroots change. Saltgrass.
Listen to all episodes of Turning the Goldfields Green on saltgrass.podbean.com.